In a dusty archive from 1944, a warning was written that would predict the future of America's economy with chilling accuracy. A French economist named Jacques Rueff laid out a mathematical proof, a simple but inescapable calculation, showing that America's monetary system was built on a flaw so profound it would inevitably collapse. You would want to stay till the end to find out the shocking truth. He warned that the Bretton Woods system, which pegged global currencies to a gold-backed dollar, was creating a financial time bomb. His prediction, ignored for decades, came true with stunning precision in 1971, when President Nixon severed the dollar's final tie to gold, plunging the world into a new era of financial uncertainty. Today, 80 years later, we are living through the sequel. The very same mathematical impossibility that Rueff identified is not just a historical footnote. It is the engine driving our current $33 trillion debt crisis, and the same official denials and dismissive rhetoric are being used to lull the public into a false sense of security. This is the story of the 80-year-old warning America has ignored, the cycle of denial that has defined our financial policy, and why understanding this forgotten history is the key to protecting your wealth before the next crisis arrives. The mathematical trap that Jacques Rueff identified was deceptively simple. Under the Bretton Woods Agreement, the U.S. dollar was the world's reserve currency, redeemable for gold at a fixed rate of $35 per ounce. Other countries held dollars as their primary reserve asset instead of gold. This created what Rueff called a deficit without tears for the United States. America could buy goods from other countries, run trade deficits, and pay for it all by simply printing more dollars. Foreign nations would then hold these newly printed dollars in their central banks. This was a privilege no other country had. For a while, it seemed like a perfect system. America got to consume more than it produced, and the rest of the world had a stable, reliable currency to anchor their economies. But Rueff saw the fatal flaw. He calculated that as America's deficits grew, the number of dollars held overseas would eventually far exceed the actual amount of gold held in U.S. vaults. When that moment arrived, the promise of convertibility would become a lie. It would be mathematically impossible for the U.S. to honor its commitment. Any country that tried to redeem its dollars for gold would trigger a run on Fort Knox, forcing America to either default on its promise or lose its entire gold supply. Rueff warned that this wasn't a matter of if, but when. He argued that the system was inherently unstable, creating a ticking clock that counted down to the day the dollar's credibility would evaporate. His warnings were published, debated in academic circles, but largely dismissed by American policymakers. The U.S. was the undisputed economic superpower of the post-war world, and the idea that its system was fundamentally broken seemed preposterous. The warnings from a French economist were seen as little more than academic contrarianism, irrelevant to the realities of American power and prosperity. The math, however, was unforgiving, and the clock was already ticking. By the 1960s, the cracks Rueff had predicted began to show. America's spending on the Vietnam War and domestic Great Society programs accelerated the printing of dollars, and the number of dollars held abroad swelled. Allies like France, under President Charles de Gaulle, who was advised by Rueff himself, began to grow uneasy. They saw their vaults filling up with U.S. dollars while America's gold reserves dwindled. De Gaulle famously criticized America's exorbitant privilege and began aggressively converting his nation's dollar reserves back into gold, pulling physical bars out of the U.S. Treasury. This was the beginning of the end. Yet, how did American officials respond? They didn't engage with the mathematical reality. Instead, they resorted to rhetoric. They accused de Gaulle of being an agitator, of trying to undermine the global financial system out of petty nationalism and jealousy of American leadership. The warnings from foreign officials and economists were brushed aside as sour grapes from less powerful nations. The official line from Washington was one of unwavering confidence. The dollar was strong, the U.S. economy was the envy of the world, and any suggestion to the contrary was dismissed as unpatriotic or ill-informed. U.S. Treasury Secretary Henry H. Fowler famously stated in 1965 that the dollar was as good as gold. But behind the scenes, panic was setting in. By August 1971, the situation had become untenable. Britain requested to convert $3 billion into gold, a demand the U.S. simply could not meet without triggering a complete collapse. President Nixon was forced to act. In a televised address to the nation, he announced the temporary suspension of the dollar's convertibility to gold. That temporary measure is now over 50 years old. Rueff's prediction had come true, not because of a conspiracy or a sudden attack, but because of the cold, hard logic of mathematics. The system had collapsed under the weight of its own internal contradictions, just as he had calculated it would nearly 30 years prior. Now, fast forward to today. The names and dates have changed, but the underlying pattern is identical. We no longer have a gold standard, but we have something just as precarious: a system built on debt. The U.S. dollar is a pure fiat currency, backed by nothing more than the full faith and credit of the U.S. government. And that faith and credit is being tested like never before. Our national debt has ballooned to over $33 trillion, a number so vast it's almost meaningless. Just as America paid for its deficits in the 1960s by printing dollars for the world to hold, we now pay for our massive government spending by issuing debt, bonds, and treasury bills that the rest of the world is expected to buy. We are running the same deficit without tears, but on an exponentially larger scale. The mathematical impossibility that Rueff warned about hasn't disappeared. It has simply shape-shifted. Instead of a run on gold, we now face the risk of a run on U.S. debt. Major foreign creditors like China and Japan have begun to slow their purchases of U.S. bonds, and in some cases have become net sellers. Countries are increasingly looking for alternatives to the dollar for international trade, a trend known as de-dollarization. And what is the response from our leaders? It is an eerie echo of the 1960s. When critics point out the mathematical unsustainability of our debt, they are dismissed. When foreign leaders talk about diversifying away from the dollar, they are accused of jealousy or trying to undermine the U.S.-led global order. The rhetoric is identical. Officials assure us that there is no alternative to the dollar, that global demand for U.S. debt is endless, and that the concerns are overblown. They are using the same playbook of denial and dismissal that their predecessors used right up until the moment the Bretton Woods system imploded in 1971. This isn't just an abstract economic debate. It has tangible consequences for every single American. The same mathematical forces that destroyed the gold standard are now destroying the purchasing power of your money. To manage its impossible debt load, the government and the Federal Reserve are forced into a corner. Their primary tool is to create more money, to devalue the currency, a process we experience as inflation. This is not a side effect, it is a feature of the system. It is a hidden tax that erodes the value of your savings, your retirement accounts, and your paycheck. The price of groceries, gas, and housing isn't just rising because of supply chain issues or corporate greed. It is rising because the dollar in your pocket is fundamentally worth less today than it was yesterday. The system is designed to punish savers and reward debtors, with the biggest debtor of all being the U.S. government. The financial security you've worked your entire life to build is sitting in a currency that is programmed to lose value over time, a slow-motion default on the promise that your savings will be there for you when you need them. For 80 years, America has been caught in a repeating cycle of arrogance, denial, and crisis. We embrace systems with fatal mathematical flaws. We dismiss the warnings of those who can see the writing on the wall, and we wait until the 11th hour, when crisis forces our hand to make drastic, reactive changes. We did it in 1971 with the gold standard, and we are doing it again today with our mountain of debt. Understanding this pattern is not about predicting the exact day of the next crisis. It is about recognizing the fragility of the system and taking steps to protect yourself from the inevitable outcome. The politicians and central bankers will continue to offer reassurances right up until the moment they can't anymore. They will use the same tired rhetoric of dismissal and denial because acknowledging the truth would be admitting their own failure. But the math, just as it was in 1944, is relentless. The warnings are clear for anyone willing to look. The only question now is whether you will heed them or whether you will be caught by surprise when history, once again, repeats itself. The choice you make today about how you protect your wealth will determine your financial future in the uncertain economy that lies ahead. If you like this video, subscribe to our channel for more financial mysteries around the world.